Welcome to Walls of Sound. Your hosts, Brian Teasley and Ryan Murphy, have spent decades on both sides of the stage, from playing in bands and running venues to uncovering the stories and history behind those spaces. This is the podcast where music meets the places that shape it. And here, they'll explore the people, history, and culture of music venues, how they're built, how they're run, and how they've created the soundtracks of our lives. From legendary halls to underground hideaways, these walls hold the stories that make music come alive. So step inside, because every wall has a story to tell.
Case study: the Grateful Dead Wall of Sound PA system. Today we're getting into one of the strangest and most ambitious ideas in live music history, the Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound. This wasn't just a PA system, it was a full rebuild of what a concert could sound like, designed so that the band could hear themselves clearly and the audience could hear everything no matter where they were standing. We talk about how it came together, from early Bay Area gigs and the acid test to Owsley Stanley's obsession with clarity, and how a group of musicians and engineers ended up building something that looked more like scaffolding on a construction site than a touring rig. It only existed for a short window, but it changed how people think about live sound, touring, and what it means to hear a band. So Ryan, I'd like to start today by talking about your illustrious history. I heard that they used to call you Captain Cosmos, and you won the noodle dancing contest in Florida for the Deadhead Coalition there.
I wish that was true. And I'll say, when I was in high school in Daytona Beach, Florida, I will say this, like my memory serves me in the way of thinking that my parents listened to the Grateful Dead. There's one or two kids in my high school who would wear Dead shirts.
Right.
I don't even know if they listened to the Grateful Dead. I was more plagued with ska and ska dancing in Daytona Beach in high school. So if I could have been a noodle dancer back then, if I was exposed to it, I would have happily taken that title.
I came up in punk rock and hardcore starting in the mid 80s, which basically was when all those bands started putting out bad records. But the Grateful Dead stood for something that was not angry. It was just the antithesis. It was an easy target for punk rock and hardcore music.
For sure.
So it took me a lot longer. I actively fought being a Grateful Dead fan for quite some time.
Yeah, same. I think I was exposed to it as a child. I know my dad was always playing different elements of it. There always seemed to be a live record more than anything.
They were a live band.
They were a live band. And I just as a kid, couldn't get behind it. It was other stuff that stuck for me. Even a John Prine and some of the stuff from my childhood still it followed me through my 20s and stuff like that. Ring True Dylan, obviously. The Dead, I was ugh. I don't know. The cartoon version, the stereotypes of a Deadhead. I'd see some of the burnouts.
Yeah, but when you really dig into it, the way they operated and the whole...
Incredible.
It's absolutely fascinating.
I think I had to go through the Bill Graham understanding of, and then seeing how San Francisco, and we've talked a little bit about it, but my misunderstanding was here's a bunch of people on drugs just jamming out. It sounds like shit. Everyone in the audience doesn't care because they're on drugs and just twirling and whirling, and they do it for hours, and that's a concert. That is not at all. That band was so intentional. They were really working hard on so many levels.
I think my biggest problem is I'm scared of my own feet. I don't like seeing myself barefoot. So the idea of dancing in grass, although grounding is a big thing now where you're supposed to ground to the earth.
Yeah.
Where I really got, it was just about 10 years ago, and it was when Saturn, the club that I run, opened, and I was partnered with the Bowery Presents. Jomo, who's one of the heads of the Bowery, is just a tremendous music fan. He probably wouldn't call himself a musicologist, but he basically is. And when the Dead 50 were doing those concerts, we did a simulcast at Saturn. It was a pay-per-view thing that we paid. And I went to every used PA store and friend I had, and we built our own wall of sound on stage. So it was the regular PA system plus about 45 other speakers, and everybody there had so much fun and was so into it. I really got it. You think about, sure, a lot of people were on acid, but it was expanding people's minds with science. They were like, honestly, like the amount of math that it took in to create the wall of sound, which is our subject today, which we should stop for a moment and say it's not necessarily our name of our podcast. It's a riff on both the Phil Spector recording technique of quadrupling bass guitars and whatnot to create this wide reverberant sound, but also the Grateful Dead wall of sound. The mythology, the history of it is utterly insane. It really is. It was funded on acid. I mean, at least the origins of it.
It took me digging into this to even understand there was a small blip of time where this was in the world touring and like active, and what went into it is mind-blowing. I didn't realize how much it changed live music and the audio experience. Looking at pictures of it built at the Hollywood Bowl, like you see these venues, you've seen the traditional PA, even like massive production with video walls and stuff. You're like, yeah, you see this from that year, 1974. You see this wall of sound on one of those stages, and it's fucking cool looking. It looks like Mad Max Thunderdome style, like way of touring.
There's what they call architainment, and where I learned that term was I watched this Martin Lights video of this woman that designed like the Limelight and the Sanctuary and all these disco clubs. And the idea is that the PA, the lights, the system architecturally have a look and a fascination of their own. The wall of sound that the Grateful Dead, it's architectural. It's like, it's got more scaffolding than the East Village. I mean, with buildings there, and it's just stacked. People don't draw it. You know where I do think they do is somewhat in EDM and DJ culture, people making their own PA systems and getting back to that.
The appeal, when I see something like that, I'm like, man, that looks dangerous.
Right, it does. And it was.
Yeah. And the stories of the Grateful Dead doing things that had a ton of thought and math and science and acid, but yet they seem so dangerous and seem so wild.
With as many people that were flipping on doses, putting that thing together, and at one point they had a double set of the scaffolding that was piggybacking, which I think they're one of the early adopters of, which tours do all the time now, where a B crew is heading to the next city. The amount of innovation technique-wise outside of technically what the PA was doing is just incredible. Let's go back to the origin. It's 1965, and the Grateful Dead are the Warlocks at this point, basically, which, as an aside, who else was the Warlocks? ZZ Top and the Velvet Underground, before they were ZZ Top and the Velvet Underground.
All three of those bands were the Warlocks.
Pretty crazy. And not totally sure, but Phil Lesh saw, I think, what was the ZZ Top version of the Warlocks had a single, and like, we got to change the name.
Wow.
So
I did not know that. That's
crazy story. But a lot of fortunate things happened to lead to this trajectory of the Grateful Dead being so obsessed with clarity and sound and having an incredible audio experience for their audience. Ruth Garcia, Jerry Garcia, who I don't think gets enough credit, buys the Grateful Dead a small little, I don't know, Fender or some other PA of the era to do the club gigs that they're doing.
That's right.
So they have an entree into, we're going to have our own sound system, because most everything else was just old pre-war military or like basketball stuff.
I always love hearing stories like this where it's like the mom, the grandma. Right. There's someone in the family that believes in their kid's band enough. The Warlocks.
Right.
And I'm sure like buying something that's probably beyond her means even just to support, and what a great legacy. She helps elevate by getting the best PA she can just to have them have their own PA. They're set off on the right trajectory. The bands who had that support and had the ability, like, it was Jerry Garcia's mom who really planted the seed to birth the wall of sound.
Yeah, there's always that, and going back to the punk rock stuff, you always like, we need to find a bass player who has a van or whose parents have a van.
Yeah, exactly.
So that kind of already gets them started in all those gigs they were doing at clubs up and down the Bay Area, thinking about their sound, thinking about how they can hear themselves better, because it was just a fight trying to be heard. Monitors hadn't been invented yet, like stage monitors that point toward the band. And then in late 1965, early 1966, they started playing the acid tests, these things that Ken Kesey were putting on, immortalized in the Tom Wolfe book. And these were happenings where the test was just to get through the night, tripping your mind off. Owsley Stanley saw the Warlocks and was so fascinated by it, and they started becoming the house band for all those acid tests that were done, which already put them ingrained in that culture.
Yeah. And again, one of those where Owsley there, it took him seeing them and then being, you have to be part of this. And then I need to be part of you. The right time, right place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the right bank account, because Owsley Stanley had a background shortly in the military and then with ham radio and television. He was obsessed with sound. He had a lot of things that were being used too for larger gigs were these old Altec Lansing, like voice of the theater speakers, and he had those set up at his house. He saw the Grateful Dead as a vehicle to perfect his quest for perfect sound. And he was basically a millionaire from selling acid.
Apparently really good acid.
The best.
Yeah.
And he was the real chemical engine behind it. He jump-started and basically bankrolled the band and gave them access to being able to keep pushing it forward and always adapting, always changing, always pushing for the best possible thing they could have.
What's the name of the condition he had?
Synesthesia, where sound would trigger like colors and things like this.
Hearing that, it's a funny thing because it's such a huge part of the story. But if someone were to be like, hey man, the Grateful Dead, the guy who built the PA, he saw colors come out in the music, man. And that's how he bets, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah,
but
right.
it's, no, genuinely.
It's a real condition.
It's a real condition. And his experience seeing them and him becoming obsessed with the cleanest, biggest, purest sound with no distortion, which is the whole thing behind this. He became obsessed to build this perfect PA for this band. That is wild. That is the true story.
Yeah. It's not my claim, but it's in the brilliant book that Brian Anderson wrote that we based a lot of this on called Loud and Clear, is that people on the spectrum, which they have obviously thought that Owsley was, are obsessed with various kinds of distortion. Like
makes total sense.
Things that are noise in a visual system or aural system. It's not just volume, it's also clarity. And
That's right.
He basically paid for all the R&D that they did before people even called it that. They got to where they were also recording the shows, putting in the system in the mixer that they had, which served as another innovation, which they were being able to review their shows and adapt to what they were hearing from the night before or whenever they were listening to it. Having clear sound for tapers to make these bootlegs and embracing that culture was so ahead of its time.
Those live recordings from 1974, and to note, 1974 was the year that the Wall of Sound existed. I like that this only had a window of time, but it had such a profound impact.
It was an utter triumph, but it was one that couldn't last because of the heft, the weight, the logistics, the expense of it. Because Owsley Stanley wasn't always involved with it. He actually went to prison from 70 to 72. So much stuff, because they were innovating, was blowing up and breaking, and there was constantly set delays and technical difficulties. The amount of patience they must have developed, probably why they can play for 4 or 5 hour gigs. The amount of patience they had to develop to deal with PA calamities, even pre-Wall of Sound. And you hear it on some of the early bootlegs. We've got a technical difficulty. We'll be right with you. Usually Bob Weir is saying it, which, God rest his soul, inspired us wanting to do this episode. It wasn't all perfect sound all the time. It was definitely a lot of trial and error. The fact that they took it to Europe, the expense of that must have been astronomical.
No, I don't even understand how that happened. For them to have to make the decision must have been a hard one. The band was at a point where they're not getting paid.
Yeah.
And they're rolling about
it.
And I think it was wearing and tearing on people. The crews were immense. And as you said, now it can be pretty standard to see in these larger, especially stadium arena touring acts, to have an A set and a B set that are rolling from city to city and building the night before they get there. But to be doing that at this time, I guarantee it was unheard of.
Alex Cooley from Southeastern Attractions, because he worked with the Allman Brothers a lot, who built their own system as well, nothing to the degree of the Wall of Sound, was saying that, think about this. Everybody else is playing through a little shitty, basic PA that was meant to do a school pep rally.
Yeah.
And the Grateful Dead's coming out with this incredible systems that people are hearing the vocals. You think you go back to Shea Stadium and it destroyed the Beatles playing live. It's not being able to hear. Plus, they were having to deal with all the high-pitched screaming. Probably was not fun to play live for a lot of bands, just not being able to hear your vocals.
That's funny. For some reason, especially like when we were on tour in Europe, or there was different places we would go. Our bass player in particular, for some reason, the bass amp wasn't working, or we were trying to figure something out. And for whatever reason, they had convinced the bass player just to play through the PA.
Just put a DI on it and go.
Yeah, it's right through the PA.
It never is a good idea.
It's never a good idea. But I remember multiple times thinking, this isn't right. And our bass player just like doing it anyways. And then being like, this must sound so. And at the time, we didn't care. Like, it sounds terrible. Who cares? Everyone in the crowd they're probably going to look the way they look, whether or not we had a bass amp. Anyways, hearing the through the PA while we were trying to sing was just crazy. So knowing Jerry Garcia's mom getting a proper PA, like the things that have happened for them to be able to fine tune and obsess over the right things was great. And it wasn't just for them. They were doing this for their fans, but to create this wall of sound to where they could stand on stage and they were having the best experience of what they were putting out there is pretty cool.
What's fascinating to me, but also is just so logical, is that there's all this science and push for technology that they completely created. But the real quest was to not think about the sound, because you know this from playing live. When you're thinking about the equipment, when you're thinking about amps and speakers or something doesn't sound right, or you're struggling to hear something, it's never fun. When you don't have that, when everything just feels perfect, it's like you're flying
You're in the flow,
air.
man.
And I think that's what they were searching for as a band.
For sure.
Maybe the people that were creating and working in their crew and for the sound had a different quest, but they were mutually agreeable pushes to make this amazing sounding thing, and that the audience benefited the most.
Several of the things that I can think of that the Wall of Sound is pretty responsible for it. Because I think if people don't understand this, the Wall of Sound was built behind the band. And that's a massive PA to be behind the band. And if anyone's ever experienced someone who accidentally puts the microphone in front of a PA speaker and that horrific squeal.
Because you get an infinite feedback loop.
That's
the
right.
The microphone's feeding back upon itself.
So how they built this was so technical and so intentional to avoid that. So it's like the 2 microphone setup for Jerry Garcia, where it was the predecessor, the precursor for like noise cancellation.
And basically the way that worked is you had one microphone that they would sing into, one microphone right next to it that they would have to avoid singing into that would pick up the sound of the PA system and everything behind them. They would flip the phase on those two. So basically, because of the way phase works and being completely reversed, it got rid of all the noise behind them. Now, what it did, though, is make sometimes, because you're missing a certain amount of decibels with those frequencies that are being canceled, sometimes it would make the vocals sound thin. But the fact that they could play with their amps behind themselves, much like you would play in a practice space and just be able to jam, made them able to play some incredible live shows where it just felt so natural.
Let's also note that this thing was 3 stories tall.
With scaffolding, not hung.
No, they had to build it from scratch with scaffolding every single time they put it up. If people listening haven't seen pictures of it or aren't familiar with it, you should Google pictures of it, because it's cool.
Yeah, you know what's just occurred to me is we haven't fully described what it is. It was over 600 speakers, boxes and speakers that they built themselves. Also a combination of JBL and various other speakers. It wasn't the band or Owsley Stanley that were just doing this. It was a host of people throughout the years that were pushing this forward. There was a company called Alembic that was Ron Wickersham and Rick Turner, and later Don Healy, that was like doing their front of house, all freakishly smart minds. It really, It's so corny to say it took a village, but it really did.
No, that makes sense. And when I'm looking into it and I see, just to single out Phil Lesh, what he had behind him, this 32-foot, and it's...
Yeah, they each had their own column.
They each had their own column. And Phil Lesh got to hear a bass wave is 32 feet high. And that's how it's built. So he's getting this complete bass wave with specific frequencies for each part of it.
Each string had its own.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
The thing is now, and they ran at full range, there weren't subs. Like, you would never do that today. The way modern PAs work with line arrays is have the high frequencies through certain speakers. You have the mid frequencies through. Sometimes you have 4 or 5 wave, and the subs are the lowest ones. They don't overlap as far as the frequencies for clarity, but they wanted it to have everything to have full range and be able to basically sound like they sounded at practice or in any kind of environment where they really enjoyed being able to jam without having to think about it.
I understand why they had to abandon it, but like that transition must have been tough. They went on to still have great PA systems, but
I don't know if the future and the history of PA systems post the Wall of Sound certainly wouldn't be the same. It almost reminds me of an alternate history, like that William Gibson book, The Difference Engine, where like computers were based on like the whole stupid steampunk stuff. Their way of doing it is so antithetical to modern PA systems, but modern PA systems wouldn't exist without what they did. And they still innovated post the Wall of Sound. Like, they were early adopters of in-ears, delay fills.
Yeah.
So many things that we take for granted as just being stock now.
They had people in their crew, including the band, that were just obsessed with the sound. And then when they'd play places that it's just a massive field, they were trying to make sure the experience for everyone there was great.
Rock had outsized itself at a rate that was beyond what the technology was catching up to. Yeah. So you have these bands playing for 5,000 people in a field or in a huge hall, and the technology just isn't there. It's basically the dial-up modem of PA systems at the time, what other people were using. And it was developed, and then 73, they start piecing it together. I think it was March of 1973 is some of the embryonic versions of what became the Wall of Sound. People talk about how much clarity, how much fidelity there was with it, but just think about seeing that. Like, you see bands with a couple Fender Twins on stage with a couple little like Fender column speakers, and then there's this thing, and you've either smoked some good weed or taken some Owsley Stanley LSD.
Yeah.
I've never been to a show on acid. I know that makes me super lame. But the closest thing I can compare it to is they gave me way too much gas at the dentist office one time. And for some crazy reason, it makes no sense, but they were playing Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. And I was like, oh my God, I can hear everything. I get every crystal detail. Even if somebody is walking, I would hear like the little crunch of the footsteps. And they got done giving me this root canal, and they were like, okay, you're good to go. And I literally said this. I said, is it okay? Like, this record's almost over. Is it okay if I just sit here and listen to the last few songs? I just love this Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon record. And the woman who was the dentist assistant said, we've just been listening to the radio. I completely imagine we were listening to
my question was going to be like, your dentist was playing Pink Floyd? Like,
it made no sense.
It makes no sense. But a lot of times, like, when you hear people roll out with these huge Marshall stacks, like the guitar, and you're like, whoa, and it looks amazing on stage. And you're like, oh,
that was the Kiss thing. All those hollow,
yeah. And you're like, this is awesome. And then someone like whispers in your ear, like, none of them are plugged in. And it's, what the fuck? And it's because having obnoxiously loud stage volume doesn't go well for the person who's trying to mix in the front of house for the audience. Being really loud on stage can be fun for the band, but it's a nightmare for the guy running the PA or the guy or the girl running the PA. And this also, I think one thing worth noting with the Wall of Sound is like, you didn't need a front of house mix person.
Actually, a lot of bands that come through Saturn, especially if they're an opener that don't have quite the money enough to like have a full
sound guys,
crew, they'll mix their own in-ears. That was really innovative that a lot of bands do, especially starting off. They'll mix themselves on stage and just feed us 2 stereo lines.
Yeah, and I think it's come a long way because I think traditionally it's always felt like if someone feels like they sound good on stage, chances are they sound like shit to the audience.
Yeah, you don't know.
You don't know. Yeah, and that it's always one of those things where I was never sure how to get that, but it's like I would overcompensate. I like my guitar being as loud as possible on stage. But that tended to really like put it some imbalance where this is, again, it really blows my mind how they were able to pull this off.
I'm still convinced though, if the band sounds like they want to sound, even if there's a floor tom that's got a weird ring to it, they're going to play better. And if you can compensate for it out front, it's probably better than bumming people out by telling them to turn their amps down or within reason. I'm saying if they don't have their own house guys.
Sure.
I think we at our club, we try to keep everybody as transparent and documentarian as possible and let the bands, we figure for better or worse, the bands know what they want to sound like. But I think your point about the volume, something I want to go back to is it's not just about being loud all the time. And I've noticed this just at shows at our club is a band being loud, like from point go to the end of the show, you get used to it, no matter how loud it is. I love Dinosaur Jr., huge fan, love the guys, love the band, but it's so loud the whole show. It's great, but you get used to it. Doesn't feel loud about halfway through the show because your ears have adjusted to it. But a band that had played the club before, like Low, who would be so quiet and then get so loud in various moments, you were like, you felt it really intensely. And the Dead have a lot of moments with that in their playing. There's a lot of dynamics, which I think really played to their favor with this massive PA system.
Dinosaur Jr. is fantastic, so this isn't a good example, but sometimes where you see bands and they're extremely loud, you sense it. And even I have seen enough live bands and played enough to know this, but it's like, sometimes loud is overcompensating. When I'm like, I'm feeling shaky tonight, let's just be loud. Because loud is at least better than being quiet and terrible.
It's easy to hide behind just...
yeah, exactly. Loud distortion is easier to hide behind. So to your point, whether it be Low or Grateful Dead, these bands that have these moments of there's drama in the music and in the volume, it has to be clarity. And they actually have to be on their shit.
And the fact that they were improvising so much really opened up for it to be a wide variety of experience. You could get a real stinker of a Dead show, and then you see a magical one. And I think that was part of the interest of it, is that if they were on, they were completely on. But if they were off, you accepted that, it just wasn't their night. And then you would see, maybe in the same market even, the very next show would be mind-blowing, and you're like, I caught them on this magical night. It would add to the mythos.
Totally. The mythos, the allure of it being like, I think if they were all magical nights, you just get used to it. But capturing it, it's like that magic in a bottle. Oh, I saw them on that legendary night.
Right. Right. So early 74, The Wall was becoming the band's second brain, and they're adding towers, they're swapping gear. I think that's one important point, is it was never really set up the same way twice. It was all built to how they decided a certain music hall or venue or outdoor festival. It was all based on what they thought the room needed. So it was constantly changing, and the idea that they were actually at one point doing acoustic formulas for the rooms that they were playing in before they got there, it's just unprecedented. Nobody, who does, a lot of people don't do that now. And if they do that, they do it with computers or AI. They're not sitting there on the back of a napkin, like writing acoustic formulas for the Winterland Ballroom.
Yeah, they're doing a quick advance, if that.
Just the weight of this thing was, you talk about it was 3 stories high. It was 40 feet deep. That's insane.
It's completely insane.
I feel like maybe the quest for great sound, but especially that quest that led up to the Wall of Sound, was not separate from the Grateful Dead. It was part of who they are. Because you think about 2 very famous festivals they play at, they did not have good gigs. And that is Monterey in 67 and Woodstock. They were the band, though, that was smart enough not to get in the shit at Altamont instead of Mick Jagger at 2 a.m. trying to like calm down the Hells Angels. So it gets to be 1974. They're heavily touring with the Wall of Sound, still constantly changing it. They have the piggyback setup where they have partial versions of a partial second version with the scaffolding and everything being taken to the next city overnight. It worked, but it really stretched everybody thin. The crew was on the road nonstop and they had no breaks. There was no real rotation. Yeah, just the tear down, the drive, the building was just never ending.
It's that added layer to the exhaustion of being on the road like that. Think about all the money, though. Hearing the stories about the wood, the specific birch, or whatever they like, building speaker boxes, and then just trying to smash them and drop them over and over again. So it's like even the prototypes they were having to build. I wonder even back in 1974 to 73 to 74, how much did it cost to build this with all the versions of testing, all the R&D? And yes, it was all financed by LSD.
To a certain point, yeah.
To a certain point. But it is that once it hits the road, man, like maintaining, constructing, the wear and tear. They had to have known at some point. I wonder at what point, though, what show they were at, they were like, we can't keep doing this.
It's like, what is that quote? It happens slowly until it happens suddenly. It's that kind of thing where I think because the band could feel it too. There was a lot of tension and they were playing great, but like you're saying, it was just absolutely sustainable. And the one thing that we should note that was very charitable nod to the fans was that even for the time, they kept their ticket prices low. They come out of that era playing free shows at Golden Gate Park. So even the idea of charging fans sometimes felt like a struggle.
That's a great point because I'm sure the tensions, as we've already mentioned, I'm sure at the end of the day, the pile of money that's modestly brought in through the door because of low ticket prices.
Right.
They look at it and they go, here's the crew and here's the Wall of Sound gets 80% of it.
Dozens of people to do it.
Yeah. And all the people that put it together. And here's like what it takes to get to the next stop. And here's a little bit for us to split. If tensions are high and you're like, man, we're not even getting paid for this shit.
I think, they were footing the bill themselves and it wasn't funded by a label and there wasn't Live Nation there to offer a huge sum for the tour. It was an independent operation, which is very...
Didn't you say that they were the Black Flag of the hippie era?
No, I think I said that your comments are the Red Hot Chili Peppers of podcasting.
I'll take that.
Oh, man.
I'll take that.
It depends on which member, right?
Yeah, Dave Navarro, of course.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Only because you guys both have nipple rings. Point being, they were selling out shows, but it was just the overhead, the maintenance, as you said, and they weren't maximizing profit to any degree the way bands think of it now. And there's a moment in 74 when they are booking these big shows, outdoor shows, fairgrounds, and arenas just couldn't handle the PA. The ceilings weren't high enough. The logistics were impossible. They're fried, and you can hear it toward the tail end of those recordings, and you could tell there's a different just sound in their demeanor of the way they're playing. The road crew was just sleep deprived all the time, and the gear was breaking. The constant setup and teardown just took its toll, and Jerry Garcia started getting sick of it, and Phil Lesh was sick of it, and it was starting to bleed into the music, which I think for Jerry Garcia is where it really, had to put his foot down. Is instead of being an accoutrement to the music, this is getting in the way of it. And that's where he really draws the line in a lot of ways. And it wasn't like it immediately happened, but they canceled a tour that was scheduled for early fall in Europe because they were just fried. And then they eventually did 5 farewell shows at the Winterland Ballroom. And recorded it. It became the Grateful Dead movie. It was the send-off for the Wall of Sound. It just wasn't sustainable anymore.
We talk about the mystique, if you got to catch the magic or if it was one of those nights where it was a total bummer.
Yeah.
But what was cool about you had just this window of time to see this moment in history. And now looking back on it, not just with this band, but with live music in general. If I got to see one of these shows in 1974, wow. That was really cool that I got to see that because you're never going to see it again.
It's the ultimate cred card. It was a limited time, and the Grateful Dead becoming probably the most popular or the most heralded live band of all time, which is, it's ironic that they struggled at moments to make great records. Not that they don't have great records, but a lot of people are far more into the bootlegs than they are the studio albums.
Created such a culture that I think about the jam bands that have sailed into that legacy. The amount of shows that I've done over the years with Widespread, Fish, Billy Strings is a different beast in this new era, but
he's
that's
still connected to it.
Still connected to it, but it's the mystique.
Right.
There's a, wow, if you saw this then, live experience. I love that. I guess that's why it's interesting. I don't remember hearing a Grateful Dead record in my whole life until Lauren introduced me to American Beauty. And I was like, I can get behind this. What is this? This sounds like Graham Parsons. This is like more cosmic country. This is the Grateful Dead American Beauty record. I still really love that record, but that's the, like, everything else you hear, I'll get behind a live recording before I put on a record. I don't listen to Fish or bands like that, but if I was going to, it'd probably be a live record, to be honest, for this reason.
We actually did a surround sound listening party for American Beauty and Working Man's Dead, and the mix on those was incredible. And I was hearing things in those recordings that I had never heard. And I wish you were down for that.
Do it again.
With your poi balls.
Maybe we can do Blood Sugar Sex Magic listening party.
I always thought, man, Ryan could really belt out Suck My Kiss. Oh my!
We'll do an episode on the Chili Peppers.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, after it was dismantled, the speakers were sold off, and Brian Anderson, the guy that wrote Loud and Clear, actually got one of the pieces, and some of it was repurposed.
Cool story.
Yeah, such a cool story. He calls that whole chapter The Artifact. But yeah, you were talking about how many people got to see the Grateful Dead with the Wall of Sound. You even out-cred somebody that saw the Grateful Dead in the 60s or late 70s because you're like, yeah, but did you see them with the Wall of Sound?
Yeah, exactly.
I think for those who were there, who stood out front and got to hear it, experience it, see it, for listening, for taping, or just remembering it, it really was something so fragile that couldn't last. And it still lives in the margins of every show I think they ever play. I know when they did some of the reunion shows, I'm talking about recently with
the Fare Thee
Dead
Well
and Co., they would project it at one point in the show, and people would just lose their mind. So it still has that awe-inspiring capability of just people thinking, why? How? It's those questions. It's just, it makes no sense, but they did it, and it was astounding.
And if you look, obviously, at that era, but probably most eras, even as we get to modern day, who else could have pulled that off? Think of a band that could have tried that.
I did this exercise, and I was surprised. If you really think back on it, I'm surprised, like, why was this not Led Zeppelin? They started later, but you think somebody that's so obsessed with tone and sound, and I don't know enough about Zeppelin's PA touring history, but it seems, why was it the Grateful Dead? And they fell into it just like the equipment intermingled with them. I think there's 4 or 5 things you change, and the trajectory of the Grateful Dead is very different. I'm not saying they don't become a huge popular band, but it's just Jerry Garcia's mother buying the first PA, Owsley Stanley coming in and just being a complete genius nutcase questing for perfection, and then having the whole team being in the Bay Area at that time of that whole countercultural revolution. It's just, it only could exist with those people at that time, I think.
Exactly right.
And I think, like we were saying, beyond it just being a PA system, a lot of people have amazing PA systems, but it was a sculpture. It was a philosophy. And it certainly was like the robot that ended up going haywire and overcoming its makers. But at that point in time, we're talking about it 50 years, past 50 years later. It's insane. A PA system.
There's still such a mystique. Could you imagine seeing that now? I can't even imagine that. Even, like I'm saying, the wildest production, sets, set design. There's some really great ones that have been out on the road that you get to see that you're like, that is awesome.
Right.
What a cool way to just present your music and there's theatrics and there's like the sound quality elements of it. And some people do it really great. And then there's some people where it's just them and then the small modest PA system. But then like for this, if you saw this tonight somewhere, it would blow your socks off.
I'm so glad there's plenty of photos and videos of it, or a moderate amount, because I'll never hear it, but you can hear it through the bootlegs. When you look at it, it'll last forever because it really looks like...
It's iconic.
It looks as if a neurodivergent kid had giant building blocks and put together a sound system. Yeah. It was like if God had a hi-fi system, which okay. I don't know if I'm going to top that one.
Yeah, I was speechless.
Ryan actually his hacky sack went in the sewage pipe, so he's got to climb down there to get it.
Yeah.
Always hacking and potting. That's it for Walls of Sound this episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I should say, please leave a review or like our stuff, but I'm not going to say it. I'm absolutely not going to say that.
That's great.
So we'll end there. Thanks for listening, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Brent.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Walls of Sound. Some of the source material that we leaned heavily on for this episode were books like Loud and Clear by Brian Anderson about the Wall of Sound PA system, highly recommended. Dill, My 3 Decades of Drumming, Dreams, and Drugs with the Grateful Dead by Bill Kreutzmann. Searching for the Sound by Phil Lesh. Living with the Dead by Rock Scully. The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by Tom Wolfe, of course. Grateful Dead Gear by Blair Jackson and David Gans. And The Last Seat in the House, the story of Hanley's sound. You will hear us again, hopefully in the near future.